At 2:17 a.m. in Washington, something unusual happened. Phones started ringing inside the U.S. National Security Council, and within minutes senior officials were pulled into an emergency briefing. The reason was a document that had just surfaced in Ottawa suggesting that Canada, America's closest ally, had quietly signed a massive strategic deal with China. It wasn't a normal trade agreement or routine diplomatic meeting, but a multi-billion-dollar economic and infrastructure partnership that could shift power across the Pacific. According to insiders, Washington had no idea it was coming, and within hours analysts inside the Pentagon began asking a serious question. Did Canada just break ranks with the United States? If the details of this deal are true, it could reshape North American security, global supply chains, and the balance of power with China. And what happened next inside Washington looked a lot like panic. Before we break down the leaked documents, the emergency meetings, and why this deal could trigger one of the biggest geopolitical shifts in decades, make sure you subscribe, because the story you're about to hear is still unfolding, and every new development changes the stakes. Now, let's go back to the moment this crisis began. Section 1. The event that started everything. It started quietly with no press conference and no major announcement, just a routine government filing posted late at night in Ottawa. At first, almost no one noticed it, but buried inside the document was a reference to something called the Northern Strategic Infrastructure Initiative, and attached to it were signatures from officials representing China's state development banks. Within hours, journalists began digging deeper, and what they discovered shocked Washington. This wasn't a small cooperation project. The agreement reportedly included Chinese investment in Canadian Arctic infrastructure, joint development of rare earth mineral supply chains, expanded port access agreements, and cooperation on energy and battery technology. In other words, China wasn't just investing in Canada, it was gaining potential access to some of the most strategically important resources in the Western Hemisphere. Rare earth minerals are critical for missile systems, satellites, electric vehicles, and advanced weapons, and Canada controls some of the largest untapped reserves in the world. For Washington, this raised an immediate alarm because for years, the United States has been trying to reduce dependence on Chinese supply chains. Now suddenly China appeared to be moving closer to home. And the real shock came when officials asked a simple question. Why didn't Canada tell the United States? That's when the emergency meetings began. Section 2. The first sign something was wrong. Inside the White House Situation Room, analysts started reviewing intelligence reports, and the timeline quickly became disturbing. Talks between Canada and China may have been happening for months, possibly even a year, but there were almost no signals detected by U.S. intelligence. That meant one of two things. Either the negotiations were extremely well hidden, or they were deliberately kept away from Washington. Both possibilities were troubling because Canada and the United States share one of the closest intelligence partnerships in the world through the Five Eyes Alliance, coordinating on defense, trade, energy, and intelligence. So a deal of this scale moving forward without consultation triggered immediate concern. Then another detail surfaced when a leaked memo suggested Chinese infrastructure financing could include upgrades to Arctic shipping ports. On its own, that might sound harmless, but strategically it could mean something much bigger because the Arctic is rapidly becoming one of the most contested regions on Earth. Melting ice is opening new global shipping routes that could cut thousands of miles off trade between Asia and Europe, and whoever controls those routes could control trillions in future trade. For decades, the United States assumed Canada would remain fully aligned with Washington in Arctic strategy, but this deal hinted at something very different, a possible Chinese foothold in North America's northern gateway, sending shockwaves through the Pentagon. Section 3. The secret move nobody saw. 3 days later, another leaked document appeared and it changed everything. According to the leak, Chinese companies would help build deepwater Arctic logistics hubs along Canada's northern coastline. Officially, these facilities were described as commercial shipping infrastructure, but analysts noticed something unusual. The ports were designed to handle large dual-use vessels, capable of both commercial and military operations. That doesn't automatically mean military activity, but it raised serious concerns because China has used similar strategies before, where ports built for trade eventually became strategic naval access points. What started as business infrastructure slowly turned into geopolitical leverage. Now the same patterns seem to be emerging in Canada's Arctic region, and if Chinese naval logistics access developed there, it would represent something unprecedented. A Chinese maritime presence just hours from North American territory. Inside Washington, defense officials began asking whether this could affect Arctic surveillance networks, submarine routes, early warning radar systems, and NATO northern defenses. Suddenly, this wasn't just about trade anymore, it was about security. Section 4. The global reaction. Within 48 hours, the story exploded across global media, and financial markets reacted first. Shares of Canadian mining companies surged as investors realized what the deal could mean. If China secured priority access to Canadian rare earth minerals, it could reshape the global technology supply chain. China already dominates rare earth processing, which powers fighter jets, missiles, semiconductors, and electric vehicle batteries. For years, the United States and its allies have tried to break that dominance, and Canada was supposed to help. Now, China appeared to be stepping directly into that strategy. In Washington, lawmakers called it a strategic shock, while across Europe, NATO officials quietly began asking whether the deal could affect Arctic defense planning. Meanwhile, China's response remained calm, describing the agreement as mutually beneficial economic cooperation. But Chinese state media went further and called it the start of a new era of Canada-China partnership, language that made Washington increasingly nervous. Section 5: The Escalation. 5 days after the story broke, senior officials from the White House, Pentagon, and State Department gathered for a closed-door strategy meeting. One question dominated the discussion: how do you respond when your closest ally partners with your biggest rival? Public confrontation could damage the alliance, but ignoring this situation could allow China to expand influence in North America. Washington chose a quieter approach and requested emergency consultations with Ottawa. Officially, the meeting was routine, but insiders described it as extremely tense. American officials asked direct questions about exclusive mineral access, Arctic port control, and whether the agreement might eventually allow Chinese naval access. Canadian officials pushed back strongly, insisting the deal was purely economic and that Canada remained fully committed to NATO and its alliance with the United States. Yet analysts in Washington remained uneasy because parts of the agreement were still unclear. Section 6. The strategy behind it. Soon reports emerged that European and Asian investors were considering joining the project, revealing that this deal might not just be about China, but about Canada diversifying its partnerships. Developing the Arctic is incredibly expensive, and building ports, railways, and energy systems in the far north can cost tens of billions of dollars. For years, Canada asked Western partners to invest, but many projects stalled due to slow financing and political disagreements. China, however, has the ability to deploy massive state-backed infrastructure investments quickly. From Canada's perspective, the deal could accelerate development in regions that have remained economically stagnant for decades. From Washington's perspective, however, infrastructure creates long-term influence, and whoever finances ports often gains leverage over how they are used. Section 7. The worst-case scenario. In the worst-case scenario, Chinese companies expand operations in Arctic ports, shipping networks grow, and trade routes through the Arctic become busier. Over time, Chinese vessels begin operating there regularly, and dual-use infrastructure allows research ships and Coast Guard vessels to appear more frequently under the label of scientific cooperation. Eventually, China develops a permanent operational footprint in the Arctic, and once that footprint exists, removing it becomes extremely difficult. For the United States, this touches a core strategic fear because America's security has long relied on geographic distance from its rivals. If Chinese logistical infrastructure develops near North America, that buffer begins to shrink. Section 8. What happens next? Right now, several things are happening behind the scenes. Washington is pushing for greater transparency, Canada is trying to reassure allies, and China continues framing the agreement as purely economic cooperation. But once massive infrastructure projects begin, they create momentum. Contracts are signed, billions are invested, and supply chains are formed. Reversing that process becomes extremely difficult. The real question isn't just whether this deal moves forward, but whether it marks the beginning of a new geopolitical era in North America, where alliances become more flexible, economic partnerships reshape global politics, and great power competition reaches places once considered untouchable. If that happens, the quiet document filed late one night in Ottawa may one day be remembered as a moment everything started to change.